Oxford, England. For more than 1,000 years, this city has stood where power, knowledge, and rebellion intersect. Kings have established it as their capital and shed blood for its control. Students have argued in its halls while wars raged beyond its walls. This is a place where England's future was determined, where minds were forged that would alter the course of the world, and where ordinary people fought, endured, and built something that would outlast empires. Today, using cutting-edge AI techniques, we can transform centuries-old engravings and faded photographs into vivid, lifelike scenes, bringing Oxford's extraordinary past to life in ways never previously possible. We're going to journey through every century of this city's existence, from a muddy river crossing to one of the most celebrated cities on Earth. You'll witness triumph and tragedy, brilliance and brutality, plague and renewal. This is the complete story of Oxford. Let's start at the very beginning. Not many people realize this, but Oxford's story actually predates the Saxons. Archaeological evidence points to a small Roman settlement here, including a kiln and pottery workshops. In 2003, excavations uncovered a Roman pot dating to around 100 AD, proof that people were living and working on this site nearly 2,000 years ago. But the Romans never established anything significant here. They arrived, made their pottery, and moved on. The real story of Oxford begins with the Saxons. The name Oxford means precisely what you'd expect, a ford where oxen crossed. Around the 8th century, Saxon settlers needed a way to move their livestock across the Thames, and they discovered a shallow point near where two rivers converge. The Thames, known locally as the Isis, and the Cherwell, close to what is now Folly Bridge. It was practical, nothing more. A few houses appeared, then a few more. The place became known as Oxneforda in the Saxon tongue. But Oxford's spiritual foundation comes from a Saxon princess named Friedesweide. According to legend, around 727 AD, Friedesweide was a young noblewoman who rejected marriage to a local king, choosing instead to dedicate her life to God. She established a small monastery here, constructing a church on the site where Christ Church Cathedral stands today. Whether all the legends surrounding her are accurate doesn't really matter. What matters is that her church became Oxford's first significant religious building, and Friedesweide herself became the city's patron saint. The priory she founded would stand for centuries. By 911, matters begin to grow serious. England is being torn apart by Viking invaders, and Edward the Elder, King of Wessex, recognizes that this river crossing holds strategic value. He constructs fortifications here, transforming a simple ford into a fortified town. Oxford becomes part of a defensive network shielding Wessex from Danish attack. The town sits on the boundary between Saxon and Viking territory, and that tension defines its early years. In 1002, something horrific unfolds. King Ethord the Unready issues what becomes known as the St. Brice's Day Massacre. On November 13th, Saxons across England are commanded to slaughter all Danish settlers living among them. In Oxford, terrified Danes flee to St. Friedesweide's church seeking sanctuary. The locals bar the doors and set the building ablaze. Everyone inside perishes in the flames. Among the dead is Gunhild, sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark. This single act of violence guarantees that Sweyn will return with an enormous army to seek revenge. But Oxford survives, and as the 11th century approaches, this rough border town is about to be caught in the greatest invasion England would ever face. 1066 arrives, and with it, William the Conqueror. Oxford submits to William without resistance, but submission doesn't mean trust. Within 2 years, William orders the construction of Oxford Castle, a massive stone fortress designed to intimidate the population and dominate the surrounding territory. Robert de Wiley, one of William's most trusted knights, oversees the work. The message is unmistakable. Norman power is here to stay. The castle includes St. George's Tower, which still stands today. It's not ornamental, it's a weapon, a symbol of occupation cast in stone. The Normans seize Saxon properties, redistribute land, and impose their language and laws on a resentful population. But something unexpected begins to take root in Oxford's shadow. By the early 12th century, scholars start gathering here. No one knows precisely when formal teaching begins, but by the 1120s, there are documented lectures taking place. Why Oxford? Partly because of its central location, partly because it sits at a crossroads, and partly because the church holds considerable power here. In 1133, Osney Abbey is founded just outside the town, adding to Oxford's growing reputation as a center of religious learning. Then, civil war. In 1141, England tears itself apart in a conflict known as the Anarchy, fought between Empress Matilda and King Stephen. Over the right to rule, Oxford becomes a battleground. Matilda seizes Oxford Castle and holds it against Stephen's forces. He lays siege to the castle in the winter of 1142. For 3 months, Matilda's garrison holds out, but eventually the situation turns desperate. On a December night, with the Thames frozen solid, Matilda and 3 of her knights escape by wrapping themselves in white cloaks to blend with the snow. They slip across the frozen river and flee to Wallingford. It's one of the most dramatic escapes in medieval English history, and it takes place right here. The following day, Oxford Castle surrenders to Stephen. He takes control of the city. But Matilda herself has slipped through his fingers. The war drags on for another 11 years, in a bitter stalemate. Neither side strong enough to defeat the other. Eventually, exhausted by endless fighting, they arrive at a compromise. Stephen retains the throne for his lifetime, but Matilda's son Henry will inherit it upon Stephen's death. Matilda came within a sword's edge of the English crown, but it was not to be. England wouldn't have a crowned queen ruling in her own right for another 12 years, until Mary Tudor ascended the throne in 1553. But even during those years of chaos and siege, scholars had kept coming to Oxford. And now, with peace restored, their numbers swell. The real catalyst arrives in 1167. Henry Sivu, furious with France, bans English students from attending the University of Paris. They need somewhere else to go, and many choose Oxford. The trickle of scholars becomes a flood. Informal teaching arrangements solidify into something more lasting. Oxford is becoming a university town, though no one uses that word yet. By the late 12th century, Oxford has survived conquest, massacre, siege, and escape, but its most important transformation is only just beginning. The 13th century is when Oxford ceases to be just another town and becomes something truly unique. Students and scholars are everywhere now, living in lodging houses, attending lectures in rented rooms, and frequently getting into violent brawls with locals. Town and gown tensions run deep. In 1209, a scholar kills a local woman. The townspeople, enraged, hang 2 of his innocent colleagues in retaliation. In protest, many scholars pack up and abandon Oxford entirely. Some travel to Cambridge, where they establish a rival university. It's a split that will define English academia forever. Oxford's first colleges emerged during this century. University College, Balliol, and Merton all claim to be the oldest, each founded in the 1260s and 1270s. These represent a new model for education, self-governing communities of scholars with their own rules, their own finances, and their own endowments. The idea is revolutionary, learning sustained by permanent institutions rather than the whims of individual teachers. But Oxford is far from peaceful. In 1248, a riot so severe erupts that the university suspends operations entirely. Scholars and townspeople clash repeatedly throughout the century. The violence reflects deeper resentments. Students are often exempt from local laws. They drive up rents. They're rowdy and arrogant. The locals work hard for their living and resent these privileged young men, treating their town like a playground. By 1284, Merton College establishes the first proper academic structure, with fellows, statutes, and a formal curriculum. Other colleges swiftly follow the model. The University of Oxford is no longer merely an idea. It's a physical reality built in stone, and it's reshaping the character of the entire town. Then, in the 14th century, something arrives that's far worse than any riot. The 14th century is a time when you most certainly wouldn't have wanted to live in Oxford. First, in 1348, the Black Death reaches England. By 1349, it's in Oxford. The plague kills without discrimination. Scholars, townspeople, monks, merchants, no one is safe. Estimates suggest that between a third and half of Oxford's population perishes within months. Entire households are wiped out. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The university nearly collapses from a shortage of students and teachers. Then, only a few years later, disease gives way to violence. February 10, 1355, St. Scholastica's Day. 2 students drinking at the Swindlestock Tavern complain about the quality of the wine. The landlord argues back. Insults fly, then punches. Then the students hurl their drinks in his face. The situation spirals out of control. For 3 days, Oxford descends into chaos. Townspeople attack scholars with swords and bows. Scholars fight back with whatever they can find. By the time the violence subsides, 63 students and 30 townspeople are dead. The aftermath is severe. King Edward III sides with the university. As punishment, Oxford's mayor and council are compelled to attend a mass every year for the dead scholars and pay annual penance. This humiliating ritual continues for 470 years. But Oxford rebuilds. New colleges rise from the ashes. New College is founded in 1379 with a revolutionary architectural plan, and All Souls College follows in 1438, established specifically to pray for those killed in the 100 Years' War. The 15th century brings relative stability, but the 16th century brings religious upheaval. Henry VIII breaks with Rome in 1534, and Oxford, so deeply connected to the Catholic Church, is thrown into turmoil. Monasteries are dissolved, relics are destroyed, and scholars are compelled to choose sides. The city's religious houses, Osney Abbey, Rewley Abbey, and others, are torn down, their stones repurposed for new buildings. Then, England's first queen arrives. Mary I, Bloody Mary, a Catholic queen determined to reverse her father's reforms. In 1555 and 1556, Oxford becomes the site of some of the most notorious executions in English history. 3 men, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself, Bishop Hugh Latimer, and Bishop Nicholas Ridley, are burned at the stake for heresy on what is now Broad Street. Their deaths are intended to terrify, but instead they inspire. A memorial, the Martyrs' Memorial, would later be erected on the spot where Protestant England remembers its dead. Oxford has survived plague and riot, but now it must endure the violent swings of religious reformation, and the next century will test it like never before. 1642 England is at war with itself. King Charles I and Parliament are locked in a struggle for supremacy, and Oxford finds itself at the very center of the conflict. Charles selects Oxford as his capital after being driven from London. For 4 years, from 1642 to 1646, Oxford is a royalist stronghold. The king and his court take up residence in Christ Church. Colleges are converted into barracks, ammunition stores, and weapons workshops. The city's beautiful quadrangles echo with the sounds of drilling soldiers and cannon fire. Life in Civil War Oxford is grueling. Food is scarce, disease spreads, and the constant threat of siege looms over everyone. Parliamentarian forces surround the city multiple times, cutting off supply lines. Students continue their studies as best they can, but many abandon their books to fight. In 1646, the war turns decisively against the king. Oxford is besieged one final time, and Charles, recognizing the situation is hopeless, disguises himself as a servant and slips out of the city under cover of darkness. Oxford surrenders shortly afterward. Parliament's troops march in, and the royalist dream dies. The victorious parliamentarians systematically demolish most of Oxford Castle's medieval stonework to ensure it can never again serve as a royalist stronghold. Only St. George's Tower is spared, needed as the county prison. The Norman motte, the great earthen mound constructed in the 1070s, still stands in Oxford today. The restoration of Charles Sukenu in 1660 returns Oxford to royal favor. The king remembers the city's loyalty and pours money into building projects. The Sheldonian Theatre, designed by a young Christopher Wren in 1664, is a masterpiece of the era. It's one of Wren's earliest major works, and it reflects the confidence of a city emerging from trauma. Then, in 1681, Charles summons a parliament in Oxford to avoid London's hostile crowds. It convenes in the Convocation House and lasts just 1 week before Charles dissolves it. It's the last time an English parliament assembles outside London. Oxford closes the 17th century scarred but intact, its university stronger than ever. And as a new century dawns, the city is about to enter its golden age. The 18th century is Oxford's age of reason. The university produces some of the greatest minds in British history. John Locke's ideas on governance and liberty spread across Europe and ignite revolutions. Adam Smith studies here before composing The Wealth of Nations. Edmund Halley, the astronomer, becomes civilian professor of geometry and predicts the return of the comet that will carry his name. New colleges continue to emerge. Worcester College is founded in 1714, rising from the ruins of Gloucester College. The city's streets are paved, new bridges are constructed, and the infrastructure improves. Oxford is no longer a medieval relic. It's evolving into a modern city. The city is also expanding physically. The Radcliffe Camera, one of Oxford's most iconic buildings, is completed in 1749. Designed by James Gibbs, it's a circular library unlike anything else in England. Funded by a bequest from Dr. John Radcliffe, it becomes the reading room of the Bodleian Library, one of the oldest libraries in Europe, and stands as a symbol of Oxford's enduring commitment to knowledge. Yet the university remains deeply conservative. Religious tests exclude anyone who isn't Anglican. Catholics, Protestant dissenters, and Jews cannot enroll. Women are barred entirely. The curriculum is rigid, focused on classics and theology, while the natural sciences are largely neglected. Critics label Oxford sleepy and out of touch, more interested in port and privilege than in progress. Beneath the calm surface, tensions simmer. The town still resents the gown. Riots occasionally flare up, though nothing resembling the violence of earlier centuries. The university tightens its grip on the city's governance, controlling trade and politics in ways that breed resentment among merchants and workers. As the 18th century draws to a close, Oxford is beautiful, wealthy, and intellectually vibrant, but also deeply complacent, and the industrial age is about to force it to change. The 19th century transforms Oxford from a medieval university town into an industrial city. The Oxford Canal opens in 1790, connecting Oxford to the national waterway network. Coal, iron, and manufactured goods flow in. Agricultural produce flows out. Trade flourishes. Then, in 1844, the Great Western Railway arrives. Oxford is now connected to London, Birmingham, and beyond. Travel that once took days now takes hours. The railway brings tourists. Middle-class Victorians flock to Oxford to admire the dreaming spires and wander through ancient quads. The city becomes romanticized in literature and art. But the railway also brings industry. Working-class suburbs spring up around the station. Factories appear. The population explodes from around 12,000 in 1801 to over 49,000 by 1901. The university undergoes its own revolution. In 1854, Parliament compels Oxford to open its doors more widely. Religious tests are gradually abolished, permitting dissenters and Catholics to enroll. In 1878, the first women's colleges are established, Lady Margaret Hall and Somerville College. Women can attend lectures and sit exams, though they won't receive full degrees until 1920. Academic standards rise sharply. The sciences finally receive their due. The University Museum of Natural History opens in 1860, a Gothic revival masterpiece housing Britain's expanding scientific collections. The Oxford Movement, a religious revival led by John Henry Newman, shakes the Church of England to its foundations. Churches are once again adorned with stained glass and ornate altars. And remarkably, they help restore Christmas itself. Since Oliver Cromwell banned Christmas in the 1650s, the holiday had been muted, almost forgotten. The Tractarians bring it back. Church decorations, special musical services, charity events for the poor. By the 1870s, the Victorian Christmas we recognize today is in full bloom, due in part to Oxford. In 1896, something revolutionary occurs. William Morris, not the famous designer, but a local businessman, establishes Morris Motors in a garage on Longwall Street. He begins by making bicycles, then motorcycles, then cars. It's a tiny operation at first, but it will grow into one of Britain's major automobile manufacturers and permanently transform Oxford's economy. As the 19th century draws to a close, Oxford is caught between two identities, the ancient university and the modern industrial city. And the 20th century will force it to reconcile them. When World War I breaks out in 1914, Oxford throws itself into the war effort. The university empties as students and duns enlist. The colleges are repurposed as hospitals and officer training facilities. Over 14,000 Oxford alumni serve in the war, and more than 700 lose their lives. The war memorials that appear in college chapels afterward stand as sobering reminders of a lost generation. William Morris's young car company, barely a year old, immediately halts production and converts into a munitions factory. The Cowley Works become part of the trench warfare department, producing 50,000 naval mine sinkers and Stokes trench mortars. The assembly lines that once built civilian cars now manufacture weapons of war. After the war, Morris Motors explodes in scale. By the 1920s, it's producing thousands of cars annually. The Morris Oxford, Morris Minor, and later the Mini become icons of British motoring. Cowley becomes a working-class industrial district, a stark contrast to the university's ancient streets. Thousands of workers flood into Oxford for factory jobs. The population surges. Housing estates spring up. The city's economy diversifies beyond the university for the first time in centuries. But not everyone welcomes the change. Private developers erect walls. By 1934, 9-foot-high brick barriers topped with revolving spikes are constructed, cutting straight through streets and physically separating the Cowley estate from private homes. Residents of the Cowley estate wake one morning to find their routes blocked. Their access to shops and schools suddenly lengthened, their very existence declared inferior. The outrage is immediate. Protests erupt. The Oxford Mail runs blistering editorials. Working class groups organize demonstrations. But the walls remain standing. For 25 years, the barriers stand, a physical monument to class division. Finally, in 1959, after years of campaigning, the walls come down. Bulldozers reduce them to rubble. Even today, walk through Oxford, and you'll pass from cobblestone college quadrangles to working-class neighborhoods in 5 minutes. Two worlds still not quite touching. Meanwhile, as Oxford was grappling with its divisions, another kind of creation was quietly underway, and it all begins in a pub called the Eagle and Child. Every Tuesday morning starting in the 1930s, a group calling themselves the Inklings gathers to drink beer and read unfinished manuscripts aloud. 2 World War I veterans, J.R.R., Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, both scarred by the trenches, both searching for meaning in a mechanized age, are busy crafting mythologies that will redefine fantasy literature forever. The Lord of the Rings, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Screwtape Letters, all of them drafted, debated, and refined in Oxford pubs and college rooms. When World War II begins in 1939, Oxford is gripped by fear of bombing. The government considers evacuating the university. Blackout curtains go up, raid shelters are dug, and the city braces for the worst. The Morris Works shifts to war production once again, building tanks, munitions, and aircraft components. Women fill the factory floors as men go off to fight. Oxford becomes a center for code, breaking and secret intelligence work, with academics recruited into government service. And in a laboratory at the Dunn School of Pathology, two scientists are racing against time on a project that will save countless lives. Howard Florey and Ernst Chain are working to purify and mass-produce penicillin. Alexander Fleming discovered the mold in London, but it was Oxford that worked out how to turn it into medicine. By 1942, they've succeeded. Penicillin becomes the wonder drug of the war, rescuing countless soldiers from infections that would have killed them in previous conflicts. It's one of the most significant medical breakthroughs in human history, and it happens in Oxford. Miraculously, Oxford is largely spared during World War II. Hitler reportedly orders his Luftwaffe to avoid bombing the city because he intends to make it his capital of occupied Britain. Whether this is fact or propaganda remains debated, but the reality stands. While Coventry, London, and Birmingham are devastated, Oxford survives almost unscathed. Then, on May 6, 1954, something remarkable takes place at Oxford's Effley Road track. Roger Bannister, a medical student at the university, runs a mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. It's the first time in recorded history that anyone has broken the 4-minute barrier. The achievement captures the world's imagination and demonstrates that human limits are often just assumptions waiting to be shattered. The university admits more students than ever before, including growing numbers of women and international students. In 1974, the first 5 men's colleges finally opened their doors to women, breaking centuries of tradition. Meanwhile, Morris Motors had merged with Austin to form the British Motor Corporation, then became part of British Leyland in 1968. The company struggles through strikes, poor management, and competition from foreign manufacturers. By the 1980s, British Leyland collapses. The Cowley plant survives under new ownership, eventually becoming part of BMW and producing the reborn Mini. But the glory days of British car manufacturing are behind it. Today, Oxford is a city of around 165,000 people, and the university remains its beating heart. 39 colleges now operate, educating approximately 25,000 students from across the globe. Oxford consistently ranks among the top 3 universities worldwide. Its alumni include 28 British prime ministers, over 70 Nobel Prize winners, and countless other notable figures. Stephen Hawking, Oscar Wilde, Hugh Grant, Bill Clinton, Emma Watson, the list goes on and on. The city's economy has transformed yet again. The car plant in Cowley still operates, now owned by BMW and producing the Mini. But Oxford's real growth lies in technology, pharmaceuticals, and research. The COVID-19 pandemic places Oxford on the global stage in 2020. Scientists at the university, working alongside AstraZeneca, develop one of the first effective vaccines. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is distributed to billions of people worldwide, saving countless lives. But modern Oxford faces real challenges. Housing is extortionately expensive, pushing out working-class families. Traffic is a nightmare. The city struggles to balance tourism, which draws millions of visitors annually, with the needs of residents. Town and gown tensions persist in new forms. Disputes over the university's enormous wealth, while local services remain underfunded. Oxford today is a living paradox, ancient and cutting-edge, exclusive and diverse, beautiful and troubled, inspiring and frustrating. And it continues to shape the world in ways both profound and subtle. From a muddy ford where oxen crossed a river to one of the most celebrated cities on earth, Oxford's story is one of survival, reinvention, and relentless forward motion. Oxford's history is messy, contradictory, and deeply human, much like any other city. It's not perfect and never has been. But as this video has shown, Oxford has so much to be proud of and will continue to shape the world's greatest minds for decades to come. If you've enjoyed this journey through Oxford's complete history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the cities that shape the world. And as always, we'll see you in the past.